Hello and good morning, everyone. At the outset, I'd like to really extend my gratitude and and my love and my grateful. I'm very grateful that I'm here for the fourth time. Thank you, Lance, for this wonderful symposium. I am actually a little nervous today because I feel like this year's symposium has notched a level high. Everyone was so good. So I'm Sthitipragnya from Mumbai, and the timer starts now, right? Yeah, all right. So, so the title of my presentation is Evaluating Cultural Failures Through Indological Lens to General Semantics, the story of Dhritarashtra from the Mahabharata. It's an Indian mythology. Now, in my talk this year, I am looking at general semantics from two Indological lens, two of them. One through the lens of the Mahabharata, which is an Indian mythology, and the second, I mean, in the Mahabharata, I actually look at the character of Dhritarashtra, who is actually a blind king, and how his blindness is metaphorically a part of the failure that ultimately happens to his, kingdom. And the second lens, which is actually my personal favorite, is the lens of Natya Shastra, wherein I get my experience as a Bharatanatyam dancer in order to evaluate the scientific sensitivity of general semantics. All right. So the rise and fall of great empires, nations, leadership, and leadership derailment, creates for an enthralling reading. What makes these readings very compelling are the insights that they offer into identifying the ingredients of success and the recipes for disasters. As a general semanticist or as a budding general semanticist, it was my morbid enthusiasm to look at the hindsight, which means in the Indian context, the itihasa. In the English translation, it means the historical hindsight, the mythological hindsight, to investigate one of the most iconic and tipping point characters of the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, there was one person who had the power to prevent the fate of that miserable war, that inevitable catastrophe of the final battle of Kurukshetra. But he never exercised his power at all. Contrary to the very popular belief in India and the world, it wasn't Lord Krishna who could prevent the war. It was, in fact, Dhritarashtra who could prevent the war. But he did not do it. The only person with the realistic chance, but he did not exercise any of his caution for this. In the, what actually Dhritarashtra's metaphorical, the recipe to his metaphorical disaster is that he was physically blind, okay? And his physical blindness was always recognized as a metaphor for his willful, emotional, and cognitive blindness. His complete ignorance and unwillingness to face the reality and to accept what is the vice and what is the wrong, and the responsibility of the tragic events that continually unfolded during his reign. It was leadership derailment at a spectacular level. And his only feeble and possibly the insensible justification was his blind love for his sons, for his 100 sons, who were greedy, they were unethical, they were unprincipled, and completely of criminal mindsets. He silently went along with their power grab, despite knowing that they were wrong from day one. And why did he do this? Is not because he was attached to his throne, okay? He was not attached to his throne, but solely because they were his sons. He was fully aware that he was being unfair to his brother's children's, the Pandavas. We have two factions here, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Dhritarashtra was the father of the Kauravas. He agonized at length about the wickedness, about the injustice that he was collaborating in, but he never put a stop to it. Favoritism and nepotism always won out, wreaking a havoc in the sense of judgment. And at the end of it, he had this humiliating experience of surviving at the charity of those whom he had done wrong. This, this little snippet of that grand mythology is actually referred to in Buddhism as akusala kama, okay, which creates the pap. The pap meaning something that is unethical, something that is wrong. The law of karma, the way it sort of fights you back if you do wrong. So that is the pap and the ultimate downfall of human being. Dhritarashtra is a victim of blatant ignorance. He's a victim of unwholesome and unskillful actions, resulting in him not knowing despite being aware of the knowing. Okay, that is a paradox. It is appalling and it is very, very absurd to see the amount of times Dhritarashtra accepts the guilt of knowing that he's wrong. It's very surprising that he's so aware that he is doing the adharma. Adharma means he is supporting the negative, he is with the criminals by supporting the vice. In fact, his eldest son, Duryodhan, actually articulates this remarkable self-aware sentiment. And he says, knowing the good, I ignore it. Knowing the bad, I still follow it. This is my swabhav. This is my nature, my inherent nature, the lesson that he derived from none other than but his father. Here, I would like to quote a line from my favorite paper of Martin Levinson. I mean, I lovingly call him Marty. So Marty's paper, Media, Ethics, and General Semantics. He says, and I quote, General Semantics notes that either or speaking keeps us away from seeing the great diversity in the world. For example, rather than being tall or short, or liberal or conservative, most people fall height-wise and politically somewhere in the continuum. In general semantics, it observes, and strictly speaking, words don't mean, people do, right? Similarly, in the case of Dhritarashtra, when his sons were getting killed like flies in the battle of Kurukshetra, in the battle where he was self-pitying and tried to justify that, the tragedy is happening to him and his family, he self-pitied. And, to the fact that he was losing his son so mercilessly, to the justified wrath of the Pandavas. But his one of his very close associates, Sanjaya, says something, and I think he knew general semantics at that point of time. And I quote, he said that he had the unpleasant duty. Actually, Sanjaya had the unpleasant duty to sort of, describe the news of the death of his sons to the blind king. And he says that despite you knowing, why are you weeping now? You are aware, all your well-wishers had already warned you. You knew that your sons were doing wrong. You spoke harshly to them, ignoring every sane comment, every sane advice that came to you. Drona, who is the greatest teacher in the Mahabharata, you ignored him. You banished Vidur for a while. Vidur was, the Sena, basically one of the key factotums of the empire. And he's both the brother as well as one of the greatest ministers in the land, in the Kaurava kingdom. And Sanjaya then says that even I demonstrated to you with your wife that you were doing wrong, and there was time to take the step back into the hindsight and sort of rectify and get things and minimize the damage. Why do you weep now? The catastrophe is solely your fault, and if you think anybody should mourn your loss, you are deluding yourself. What is shocking in the story of Dhritarashtra is that he's so aware, but he still takes the rebuke, accepts the infallible faults, and continues to support the vice of his sons till the fag end. My question is, despite knowing the fact that his sons were doing grossly wrong and they were supporting the vice and adharma, why, despite the awareness, did he continue to be ignorant? It was his incorrigible, a favoritism to his sons, and what we now call is nepotism. Coming to today's times, here is an affronting thought. In India and the world today, we would ideally profess and admire the hero of the story, the Pandavas, the people who supported the virtue. But in practice, we somehow land up subconsciously following the Kauravas. Favoritism and nepotism continues to be a core cultural imperative. As in the story of Dhritarashtra, it depicts it has been an ancient and it continues to be a long, painfully endured imperative. The world we live in today, the Ukraine-Russian war, the rising China, the AI, the heavy infiltration of social media technologies, into nation politics, and of developing and developed countries, including India. Today, it's a very strange aberration of power-hungry, nepotistic international world order. The new age Dhritarashtras are the nations that have blinded themselves to the heavy infiltration of digital colonization. I might be controversial here, but this is my personal, this is what I believe in. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Google, Instagram, you name it, and we're there, especially the millennial and the Gen Z generation. They have flared localized social disruptions to the world events. The examples of this can actually be seen in the early 2000s from the Arab Spring times, the recent, the riots in Hong Kong, the tampering of the 2016 US elections by, the UK firm Cambridge Analytics to use the Facebook data on the American voters. To put it out very squarely, I'd like to actually quote Rajiv Malhotra, where he says that we are in an age of remote controlled social disruptions. And in an age where Twitter actually decides the valor, the honesty, and the credibility of rule makers and activism, and the outcomes of disagreements from the citizens, amongst the citizens. And this is exactly where the unfairness of the nepotism that we saw in the era of Mahabharata is sort of manifesting itself into the new age, nepotistic forces. The acknowledgement, I'd like to actually add here that there is a sense of, social pervasiveness, a sense of social bitterness, a sense of, the idea that we live in an unfair world. All the time we're complaining about this. We speak about life being unfair in a very general belief system, that life continues to be unfair. And any effort to harvest the personal gains supersedes the morals of social responsibility. One is snatched away from the judgment of, of thinking uh, onto social welfare and collective welfare because you're so individualistic in your thought process. And this deep-rooted fear and enmity between the self and what you could do for the society is getting further rifted now. Dhritarashtra knew very well that his sons wanted to hold power and they had the pelf of their cousins, but he gave into that gnawing greed to hoard more. The blind king had also acknowledged and accepted that the eldest son of Pandavas they were actually perfect to rule the kingdom. They had it all, but he allowed his sons to win. Here I'd like to actually get in a quote from the American philosopher Eric Hoffer. In his work, The True Believer, he says that when an individual's prospects and interests do not seem worthy living for, they become desperate to cling on to something that could give them some meaning and that same worth to a futile self, because they start believing that their self is no more offering anything meaningful to their existence. And Dhritarashtra is a classic example of this hollowness and meaninglessness. We therefore have this very demanding challenge in our environment, the compulsions of a collective society where family is the unit of trust and tolerance, dating back to my paper in 2017, my first presentation here. To the final part of my presentation, understanding communication through the lens of Natya Shastra into general semantics. This is my personal favorite. One of the things that Korzybski staunchly believed was in the ability to communicate, right? Which he said created the very essence of, of human vagueness and of human beingness. And vagueness and ambiguity were abhorrent to him. Korzybski always wanted, and his mission in life was to raise the consciousness of both the speaker and the listener. and to remove the underlying abstractness of words, sentences, and the way you communicate. Awareness of the disparity between abstract words and reality is the first line of defense against semantic error. The next step is to understand the abstraction ladder and how you get closer to a non-verbal plane. Here, I would like to explain what scientific sensitivity is through a Natya Krama shloka from the Bharatnatyam, from the Natya Shastra in Bharatnatyam. So it goes like this. Yato hasta, tato drishti, tato mana, tato bhavaha, yato bhava, tato rasa. What does this mean? So this explains the scientific sensitivity that Korzybski has constantly been, so passionate about. This means yato hasta, where the hands are, there goes the drishti. Where the drishti goes, there goes the mana, which is your mind. Okay, and where the mind goes, there is an expression of inner feeling, which is bhav. Okay, this is the bhav, the emotion, the inner feeling. And where there is feeling in the communication, there is something known as sentiment and emotional intelligence and the element of emotion, which is rasa. Okay, this is called angik abhinaya. And in classical dance in Bharatnatyam, there is something known as abhinaya, where we represent, the aspect of dance into different, forms of our body, right? So this invocation of the rasa is the final step of the scientific sensitivity that Korzybski was speaking about. If I'm talking to you today, this is called, so angikam is, the use of my theatrics, the way I'm using my body and limbs while I'm communicating with you. Vachikam. Vachikam means the use of song and speech. I mean, the way I speak to you today. If my pitch is not right, I think people would doze off. You need to have your pitch and diction right to communicate. Aharyam. Okay, so this is aharyam. So aharyam basically means, are you dressed appropriately in order to communicate in the full 100% with that scientific sensitivity? And lastly, satvikam. Okay, so satvikam means your passion, your moods, and your emotions. That is a part of your emotional intelligence. And that is how you would successfully be able to communicate with that utmost scientific sensitivity and avoid the aberrations of ignorance in communication. Thank you so much.